So what is this show? Why are we doing it? And who am I? Answering these three questions seems like a good place to start. We want this weekly Sunday morning show to be a place for those interested in Utah politics, policy, and news to gain a better understanding of what's happening in the Beehive State. And we want to ensure you hear from those in power as we ask them questions and do our best to hold them accountable for the decisions they make and the immense power their offices hold. So that's what this show is and why we're doing it. As for who I am, I'm a lifelong Utahn and the executive director of the nonprofits Silicon Slopes and Silicon Slopes Commons. I'll do my best to speak on behalf of you, the viewer and listener, as we navigate the most pressing issues facing our state. I'll likely come up short, but I'm committed to making myself available to listen, learn, and understand your concerns and share them with those who hold power as they grapple with and make policy decisions that affect our lives. We want to be your voice, and we'll work to earn that responsibility. This past week has been difficult, as so many weeks have been this year. High-powered winds came through the northern part of our state and wreaked havoc and caused incredible devastation. Many still don't have power this morning. And yet Utahns have responded as they so often do, with a helping hand and a love for their neighbor. It's been a hard year, and with COVID-19 is still part of our lives, protests and social unrest happening across the country and in our state calling for reform and more, and a divisive presidential election underway, it appears this year isn't going to get any easier. But a helping hand and love for our neighbor sure seems to go a long way, especially in 2020. As you know, Utah will elect a new governor this November. On the Republican side, after a tight and competitive primary, Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox emerged as the party's nominee. On the Democratic side, University of Utah professor Chris Peterson emerged as that party's nominee. With attention turning to Utah's general election for governor, we thought we'd bring both of these candidates on our inaugural show to discuss their vision for the future of Utah and get their perspective on the news of the week. I had the opportunity to interview both candidates this past week. We'll play you portions of each interview on this show and encourage you to listen to the full interviews on the State of Utah podcast, which we'll be releasing the details on how to find via our social media channels. We'll start with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, and then go to University of Utah Professor Chris Peterson. Following Mr. Peterson, I'll end the show with the final thought. The first question I want to ask you is maybe a little bit more personal, and it's around the night the race was called. The primary race was called in your favor. You got the call from John Huntsman that he had conceded the race. John Huntsman and the Huntsman family being a political institution and powerhouse in the state of Utah. John Huntsman has held the office that you're running for. He's been governor of the state of Utah. What was that night like for you?
Well, Clint, no one's asked me that question. In fact, I'd only prepared for Rage Against the Machine in Spanish Fort questions. So I'm taken a little off guard here, but I'll compose myself. Truthfully, we had escaped. The primary campaign had been pretty rough, and layering a pandemic on top of that, the way we were treated by our opponents, it was hard on the family, hard on my wife, and her sister invited us up to the Oregon coast for a couple days. And so you remember, of course, the primary campaign ended, people voted, and we knew we had a lead, but there were so many outstanding votes that we knew we wouldn't know for a few days. And we took off the next day, went to the Oregon coast. We were actually driving back to Utah. So we were in eastern Oregon, I guess, at a gas station, a truck stop, when I got the AP called the race, and I got the call, and so it was surreal, I guess, more than anything, to be in that case. You would think, and I had always kind of imagined what that moment might be like if we were successful, kind of unbridled joy and celebration. And the truth is, it really wasn't any of that. It was mostly relief, like when you stop hitting yourself in the head with a hammer. It's always good to do, and it feels good, and you're relieved. Unfortunately, we had heard earlier that morning that there was talk of a write-in campaign, and by the next day that was confirmed, and so I guess the celebration was short-lived a little bit, and so really it was more because of what we're going through right now, and the hard work on the pandemic and everything else. It was mostly just you check the box and you move on to the next thing.
Well, speaking of a write-in campaign, John had until the end of last month to make that decision on whether he wanted to launch a write-in campaign. He was being teased by, his family members. His wife was putting it on Instagram. There was a group that was, by all accounts, pushing him to launch this write-in campaign. He ultimately decided not to do it. He did go on another one of your former opponents' podcast, Jeff Birmingham, recently, and he was saying something around John Dugald, the state auditor, maybe throwing up a smoke signal that I don't really know what it was, but I mean, I guess the second question, just following up, given your answer, is what was your reaction at the end of last month when the decision was made not to launch a write-in campaign?
Well, I guess it was a similar reaction to the first time. Will this never end? Now, I have nothing but respect for Ambassador Huntsman, Governor Huntsman, and his family. They've been incredible to the state of Utah. I've never said anything negative, and won't. And I'm so grateful for their sacrifice and service, and just feel really fortunate with the field that we were running against. Again, not just him, but former Speaker of the House, Greg Hughes, former GOP party chair and national committee man from the state of Utah, Thomas Wright, not to mention those that didn't advance past the convention, like Jeff Birmingham, who's incredibly successful, Amy Winder Newton. It was just a murderer's row that we were up against, and the odds were certainly stacked against us. And I know it's losing an election is really hard. It's not fun. You put yourself out there and you go through all of this pain, and then if you're not successful, especially when you just assume you will be and you expect to be, that's got to be really hard for them. And so I've tried not to be critical of their reaction. I hoped I would have reacted differently had I lost, but you never know until you're in that situation.
How do you think the state of Utah has responded to COVID-19?
I get asked that a lot, and I think about it a lot, and I'm really proud of the way that the state has responded, and not just the state government, but the people of the state of Utah. This is just an impossible situation. I don't care where you sit, what side of the fence you're on. I think it's embarrassing that we have sides of the fence on this one. Certainly, in the debates and things, my opponents in the primary election criticized us for doing too much in our response, even though we had by every metric, we were one of the five. We had the least restrictions, one of the 5 states with the least restrictions, and then of course we're being criticized for not doing enough on the other side, which I think means we're threading that needle about as well as you can. From an economic standpoint, everybody in the nation, it's unequivocal that Utah has the best economy in the country right now, which is saying something. We also, it's unequivocal that we have one of the lowest mortality rates in the country. We haven't overwhelmed our healthcare system. We're trying to do things the right way and get people back in the economy and get kids back to school, while still protecting the most vulnerable, and so it's imperfect for sure, but it's also, and this is one of the struggles I have with the criticism, is I don't mind criticism at all, and we deserve criticism, but you have to make that criticism under the circumstances of the moment, knowing what we knew at the time. What decision would you have made? And if you would have made a different decision at that time, knowing everything that we knew, then I fully understand that. It's a lot easier to weeks or months afterwards look back and criticize, and I can do that too. I can look back and say, yeah, I wish we had done this differently, but we don't get that luxury, and nobody does. And so I'm just grateful for the way that the people of Utah have responded. The business community has responded. Silicon Slopes responds. I mean, everybody really really pitched in together. And this these allegations of corruption and you know, self-dealing that I keep hearing about, and I just, it's so frustrating because there was none of that. And people were really trying, in the way we do in Utah, really stepping up to the plate and trying to find new and innovative ways to do things. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, but I'm going to always err on the side of trying to fix the problem and doing more than doing less, and that's the right response.
There was an article in the Salt Lake Tribune recently, something, I think the headline was something around the line of your opponents were waiting for the John Dougal audit of the COVID-19, state's COVID-19 response. Do you have any response to that? I mean, and as you think about the what Dougal's doing, he was also a former opponent. He ran against you for governor. He was on one of the opposing tickets for governor, which makes it interesting. What do you, I mean, what, as you think about him, and you know, he's doing his job, he's the state auditor, as you think through, you know, that audit of the state's COVID-19 response, what was your response to, or what did you think when that article in the Salt Lake Tribune came out, and what response do you have just in general to the audit?
Well, I thought it was a weird article, first of all, but it's fine. The state, it didn't mention that he was an opponent of mine. And what's funny is he was being criticized for I don't know, for not getting the audit out earlier, hoping that it would make me look bad so that people could use that against me. Which again, it's a weird thing to be cheering for the state to fail. It's just odd to me, but lots of people doing that. What's interesting about that audit, and again, this is what the auditor does, and this is what we encouraged him to do, is to look at all of these decisions and to give us feedback, that as an independent person, as an independent group, to help us do better. That's the purpose of an audit. Audits aren't gotcha. That's not the idea behind an audit. And John Dougal is a consummate professional when it comes to this stuff. And I met with him. He sat down, answered all the questions he had. We talked about the decisions that were made, how those decisions were made, who made those decisions at the time. We have been completely transparent. I mean, every single contract, every person can go online and look at every contract, every dollar that's been spent in the coronavirus response. You can see where it went, what it went for, all of those things. And so we have not seen a draft of the audit. The way it works with the auditor when he's reviewing one of our agencies or something in the executive branch or the legislative branch is that he provides a draft of that and gives us an opportunity to respond to it, goes back, makes the evaluations, and then releases that. And so that will be coming when he's done. You know, we're not particularly worried about it because he does a really good job, and he has all of the information, all of the materials. And so we look forward to it. We think it will actually be really helpful when that feedback comes back to help us with future pandemics, future responses, and dealing with the things that we're dealing with right now.
Because it's 2020, and of course, Utah had major windstorms this past week. And, you know, you're seeing semi-trucks getting blown over. You're seeing trees in Salt Lake and northern Utah getting blown over. What's the response been to that from the state perspective? And what message do you have to Utahns during this crazy year?
Well, we're a hardy people. We're a resilient people. That's the foundation of our state. You know, I live on a farm right here that shouldn't be a farm. It's mainly rocks, and yet they stuck with it. And we haul rocks every year off our farm. Most farmers laugh at that. They've never heard of that. Every time we plow the fields, we haul rocks. And so we get what it means to be tough and resilient. But certainly this is challenging even the most hardy of Utahns to have on top of everything else, earthquake, social unrest, the pandemic, of course, and now we had a hurricane that impacted millions of Utahns, along the Wasatch Front, and the devastation for those that haven't been able to see it. I mean, it's truly remarkable. If you remember, in 2011, we had something similar, although it was more Davis County that took the brunt of that impact. This was just like that, only spread across 5 counties, and so the response has been exactly what you would expect from people in Utah. We were out yesterday, well, day before and yesterday, and going out again today. We're going to be in Rose Park this afternoon, hauling logs and splitting wood and doing those things that a lot of us grew up doing, but just didn't expect it to be in people's backyards and front yards. And it's a good year to be in the fencing business. If you do roofing, you've got a lot of work right now, but so much damage. And my message to Utahns is thank you for being you. They don't wait for the government to come and clean up their yard or their neighbors' yards. They're always 5 steps ahead of us. Governor did declare a state of emergency yesterday, which will help us allow for some of the funding that is needed for the cleanup process, and so that will continue. But man, I've always said that the worst of times brings out the best of people in Utah, and certainly we saw that the last couple days.
Pat Bagley, who's a political cartoonist for the Salt Lake Tribune, put out a cartoon, I believe on September 1st, of a police officer going into a doctor's office and getting an x-ray. And in that x-ray, it shows that the police officer has a hood, like basically just calling the police officer who's in that doctor's office a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And on the back of his jacket, the police officer's jacket in the cartoon, it says law enforcement. And you've had a lot of police officers and law enforcement agencies come out and condemn that cartoon. Do you have any response to, I mean, we're talking about a political cartoon, but do you have any response to, because that's really touched a nerve throughout the state of Utah?
Yeah, it touched a nerve with me. It sucked and it was stupid, and Pat's an idiot. And that's my response. It doesn't help anything. It really doesn't. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. I mean, you can't sit there and say, and look, I get it. There are people on the right that are absolutely as guilty as the same dumb stuff. But that, what does that do? How does that help in any way? How does that make anyone, any police officer, any of their family, anybody that is trying to bring change, when that's the kind of message that gets sent out, everybody retreats, right? They start to be vulnerable. They're coming to the table. We're trying to work on some change together, and then somebody with we don't just get to say, oh, it's just a political cartoon. We don't get to say that. It's someone who represents a very powerful voice in the community, the Salt Lake Tribune, that has been the standard bearer for many years, and it's he should apologize, and he hasn't. And so, and look, again, I get it. Now somebody can come at me with with 50 different examples on the other side, and that's the problem. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't move the ball forward, and it doesn't help. And painting, which it did, and I don't care how you try to paint it, you look at that cartoon and it's basically calling cops members of the KKK. And are there racist cops? Yes, there are. There absolutely are. They should be weeded out. They should be fired. That is absolutely true, and that is correct. But you can't paint with a broad brush like that and then hope people will come together.
The general election kind of officially is kicked off now that Labor Day has passed. What is your message to Utahns as they go to the polls or put in their mail-in ballots here over the next month or two as to your vision for the future of Utah?
Sure. You're going to be hearing a lot more of this over the next coming weeks and the next month and a half as we lead up to the general election. But the economy has to be a focus for all of us, and rebuilding to what? I don't want to go back to where we were. I want to go to something better. And there are certainly some opportunities that Utah will be able to take advantage of. But we have to make sure that everyone gets to participate in the economic growth that's happening in our state. That includes rural Utah. That includes people on the west side of the valleys along the Wasatch Front, that everybody gets an opportunity to enjoy this incredible economic growth. And then more importantly than that, I believe, is education and what we need to do there. Clint, I'm telling you, man, look, we talk about teaching a man to fish, right? And that's better than giving a man a fish. And you've been fishing a lot lately. You agree with that. And I think everybody, that's not controversial, right? We always agree that that's better. And yet, if you live in certain schools, in certain areas, certain zip codes in Utah, we teach you to fish by giving you a speedboat and a graphite rod and one of those fish finders. And man, you learn how to fish and you're going to be very successful. You're going to be fine. And then for kids in rural Utah and some other zip codes, some of those West Side schools and some of our multicultural communities, you know, we give them a stick and a string, and we can't imagine why they don't learn how to fish as well as others. And that disparity has to change. We've got to do more, and we've got to do better, and we're going to do that in a Cox Henderson administration.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Clint. Keep up the good work.
Chris, my first question for you is, you're a Democrat. You're running for governor in a state that has not elected a Democrat in a very long time. Why are you running?
Well, it's a fair question. I'm running because I want to make a difference in people's lives. I remember when the Utah Democratic Party came and asked me to run. I thought they were going to ask me to make a contribution or give a talk somewhere. I was really surprised when they asked me to run for governor, and I'll be candid, I laughed at them and threw them out of my office. But as time went on, and I thought about how many people in Utah are still struggling to get by, despite all the successes that we've had in recent years, and some of the challenges that I see that we're not grappling with respect to our environment and with respect to public education, and now more recently, the coronavirus crisis, I think that I can make a difference, and I am prepared to be an effective governor and can do the job. So look, I think that I have a message, and I believe that there are more and more Utahns that are receptive to it.
Chris, I think it'd be useful for you to introduce yourself to those watching and listening to this, as to who you are, your background, and also why you think you're qualified to be Utah's next governor.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity. My great-great-grandfather led a wagon train of 1,500 pioneers to the Salt Lake Valley back in 1847. I'm about as homegrown as you can get as an immigrant to the state of Utah. And he later went on to become the Utah public school superintendent. He was the Speaker of the House. He was also the first chairman of Zion's Bank, and also a great faith leader, the third president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I don't know where all the Zion's Bank money went, because I was raised with very limited income on the west side of Salt Lake in West Valley City. I got my first job when I was about 10 or 11 years old, picking up trash at a strip mall. Worked my way through college at the University of Utah, and eventually became a lawyer. I worked in the Obama administration, setting up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB. I also worked at the Department of Defense, helping lead the Pentagon's efforts to protect military service members from tricks and traps in our financial services products. I think that I'm qualified to be governor because I've worked at the highest levels of the federal government. And I also believe that I've spent my entire career fighting for ordinary families to get a fair shake in our society. And frankly, I think that we need a little bit of that here in the state of Utah. I know that we're a conservative state, but it's not such a unreasonable thing to have a little bit of balance. Good competition works well, not just in the marketplace, but also in government. If we don't have balance, give and take, then there's more and more chance that the government is going to become guided by party insiders, privileged elites, and even sometimes ideologues that have the government drift further and further away from the overwhelming benefit of the public. So I believe that I have something to add to the government, and it'd be hopefully a bit of a breath of fresh air in our state politics.
Given that you're running for governor, and you're running against Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, who served as the chair of the coronavirus task force here in the state of Utah, how would you rate the state of Utah's response to COVID-19?
B minus. Some things that have been reasonably positive. We're lucky that our total fatality rate is relatively low. I think that has a lot to do with our overall health level in Utah. We're a healthy people. We're active. We're physically fit, and we have done some things right. I don't want to cast all aspersions. There have been some challenges too. I'm not convinced that the financial stewardship has entirely been there, using all the resources effectively. But the biggest criticism I have is that, look, about 30 states, more than 30 states around the country have imposed statewide mask mandates. Most of the countries of the world who have been more successful at getting their virus under control have recognized that masks, although they're inconvenient, they're not a lot of fun. If we're not capable of engaging in social distancing, we need to put masks on to take care of one another, to love our neighbors, and the science all points in that direction. So look, we need to have masks on, and the counties that are wearing masks and have a mandate, like Salt Lake County, are being much more effective at getting their curves down than some of the counties that are not. So that's one clear distinction. I would listen to public health experts on that. It's not just good for public health, though. It's also good for business. Businesses right now are struggling, especially many small businesses that don't do well in a virtual environment. Places like restaurants, theaters and music venues, places where people gather need to be able to do so in a way where there's some minimum level of safety. Grocery stores, another great example. And the folks that are refusing to wear masks are hurting those businesses. That's a different direction. Looking forward, I think that we did not do a good enough job trying to get low interest rates right now, bonding for shovel-ready infrastructure projects to spur our economy. I also think we could have done a little better job helping out landlords and tenants, making sure that we don't have as many evictions. We're also looking at a lot of residential home mortgage foreclosures that are very troubling to me. And I think that we haven't done enough job making sure that everybody has the personal protective equipment, like things like N95 masks, and with wide availability to keep people as safe as possible. So there have been some positive things, but overall, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement.
Would you have reopened schools?
I do think that reopening schools is one of the toughest decisions we've had to make. I support the governor's order to have masks. I think that I probably would have tried to do it a little bit slower, tried to focus first on getting the youngest children back to school first, because they have the hardest time doing distance learning. They also appear, based on the science, to have the best immune response to the virus. I think that we probably should have used smaller pods of students in staggered time periods to try to decrease the potential for spread of the disease. Some school districts are doing pretty well at that. Others, I think, a little bit less so. But we also have to recognize that kids need to go back to school and parents need the support with childcare. So I would have reopened schools, but I probably would have been a little bit more cautious and a little bit more tactical in the way that we did so.
When you think about the long-term education here in the state of Utah, and that being a big focus, always seems to be a big focus every election year on improving education here in the state of Utah. Would you think it'd be wise for the government to invest more on the infrastructure side of things so that even COVID-19 or no COVID-19, remote learning is more powerful, more sustainable than it currently is?
Clint, I absolutely think so. I think that there are a number of different ways that our public school system is tragically underfunded. We have the lowest per pupil spending in any state in America, and have for decades now. And that bears itself out, not just in terms of the point that you raised of lack of technology, resources, and infrastructure to teach in alternative environments, but it also means class sizes that are overcrowded and teachers that are distracted and can't spot kids who are struggling. It means that we don't have enough counselors and nurses to take care of the kids who really need help. We have one of the highest teen suicide rates in America. I think that's actually tied to our shockingly underfunded public school counseling networks. I also would add too, at the most basic level, 1 in 4 children in our state can't read in the 4th grade. What does that say about how we're setting up our children to be successful in the future? I think part of our challenge is we have big families in our state, and I'm okay with that. I support that. I have 3 kids of my own, and a 4th would be just a blessing, and I'd be happy to have them. But the fact is that even though we have large families, every child deserves the best opportunity to succeed, and we need to come together to provide the resources to give them those opportunities. It's something that we're failing at the state level. Utah should be able to fund our schools better than New Mexico, than Mississippi, other states that have much, much lower incomes than we do and much less diversified economies than we do. We're not doing a good enough job, and I have no expectation that that's going to change in a Cox administration. Why? Because, well, look, the Republican Party has had decades to try to get this right and has not got the job done. I'm going to do a better job. I'm going to fight for those kids. I'm going to fight for our public schools to provide the best opportunities to help our children succeed.
So the final thing that seems to be hovering over this election, and again, the country, is we're going to elect a president in November. And it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. As you look at that race, and as you, obviously you're a Democrat, as you look at, the way that is impacting so many things currently, and the way, the election that's coming up, and the way that it's being talked about, the way that it's being covered, and the way that it's dividing this country, if we can just be honest. How would you, what advice would you have for Utahns as we navigate this until November? And are you endorsing Joe Biden? I don't know if you've said that entirely.
Yeah, so couple things here. First off, I do think that the division that we have in our society is getting a bit poisonous. And I worry about our ability to come together and find compromise and to get along with one another. And frankly, it's one of the things that I find troubling about the president. I realize that many Utahns are going to vote for President Trump, but I just ask you to bear in mind, is he doing everything that he can to be a peacemaker, to try to reach across party lines and represent all Americans? I feel like too often he tends to put gas on the fire of our divisions. But it's not just him, and it's also not just from the Republican side. We have our own firebrands in the Democratic Party. I'm doing the best that I can to try to forcefully and persuasively advocate my case for change in the state of Utah, which is a relatively moderate vision for the state, still fiscally conservative, but trying to be a bit more inclusive, fund our public schools. Something we haven't talked about that's very important to me is air pollution, a real challenge along the Wasatch Front, especially down the road as we grow more and more. But I will say I have endorsed Joe Biden, and I realize that that's not going to be the most popular choice in the state. But as I look at our future, he strikes me as a better role model for our children. Is he perfect? No. Is he the candidate that most Utahns are going to get behind? I don't know. But when I look at my own heart, my own conscience, I think that he's a better role model for our children and will steer us on the path towards prosperity and decency, and hopefully heal some of the wounds and division that we're facing in our society. I also think that the technology industry has a role to play in this. One of the challenges that we face in our society is that as more and more of us are fragmenting off into different technological realms, whether that's Facebook groups or your Twitter following or pockets of Instagram, it's harder for us to reach across this logarithmically driven gulf that's being created between us to try to find common ground with our fellow Utahns and fellow Americans. It's something that we've got to think about and start to make progress on. It's something I hope to do. I want folks to know that although I am a Democrat, I plan to be a governor if I'm elected for all Utahns, and would govern with humility and respect, recognizing that a majority of Utahns are very conservative, want low taxes, and want to have a family-oriented government. That's the kind of leader that I aspire to be, and hope that folks will give me a chance.
Finally, Chris, given that it's 2020, and of course, our state, and particularly northern Utah, where you live, up in the Salt Lake City area, experienced massive wind. What was it, 99 miles per hour, maybe even reached 100 miles per hour. And I saw on social media that this wind knocked over like a 100-year-old tree in front of your house. How are you and the family? I can't believe that.
I love that tree. I'm going to miss it. But look, don't worry about me. I've got a lovely old home, and I'm much more worried about just, about 3 blocks away from me, there's a homeless encampment. there are people that right now don't have anywhere to go. More and more of them are infected with the coronavirus. Many of them don't have a place that they can use the bathroom. And those are some of the challenges that we haven't managed to talk about today. My family is going to be just fine. I'm running in this race to try to serve the public, and not just the privileged party elites, the insiders, but everybody, the children that aren't getting the education they deserve, the seniors who are struggling to breathe in our inversions and ozone pollution, and the homeless folks on the street that have been left behind. My opponent, who, as I've said, is a nice guy, I like him, but not only was he the coronavirus task force he was also the head of the homelessness task force. And as I drive by the homeless encampment not far from my street, from my home, I worry that we have not grappled with those challenges and are headed down a path that has some of the worst aspects of San Francisco, which has that challenge, but also some of the worst characteristics of Texas, which has too many low-income jobs with no benefits or health insurance. We need to forge our own better path in this state that cares for all of us, but also has that vibrant and successful economy that we're all looking for. I think I have the dynamism, the excitement, and the energy to be that leader that Utah needs. I hope you'll give me a chance. I hope that the Silicon Slopes leaders across the state will recognize we need a breath of fresh air in the governor's office. I'm hoping that you'll give me the chance to be that.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I hope we'll see you again along the campaign trail, and best of luck.
Hey, Clint, it's an honor to serve, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing at Silicon Slopes.
I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and Professor Chris Peterson for coming on today's show. And I want to thank you for tuning in. We'll likely tweak this show and hopefully improve in the weeks and months ahead. To do so, we'll need your feedback and support. Please reach out to us at stateofutah@siliconslopes.com with any feedback or suggestions of stories we should cover or guests we should have on. We want you to think of this as your show, as that's how we think of it. Signing off this Sunday, my name is Clint Betts. Thank you for tuning in, and have a good week.